Good morning and welcome. My name is Silvana Muscella. I'm the project coordinator of ICT Footprint and the CEO of Trust ICT Services, which is a dynamic SME based in Pisa and the UK. So before we start, some housekeeping. Turn on your system sound. Remember, we have questions on the right-hand side of the screen, so please do submit them when you're listening to the presenters, but we'll make sure we'll tackle them at the end of each of the speaker slots. And do follow us on Twitter, which is ICTFOOTPRINT.eu. So today's webinar is on new GHG ICT sector guidance, self-assessment tool services ready to use, and data center standards. This is the title of today's 60-minute webinar, and we're thrilled to have with us Alex Bardell, the member of the Executive Board for Sustainability for London, and Andy Stevens, who's Senior Customer and Project Manager at Carbon Trust. What we do, just before we move to our speakers, we'd like to zoom in clearly on what ICT Footprint is. And this is a coordination support action funded under the Horizon 2020 program of the European Commission, where we're 1 year into a 36-month project, which wants to become the consolidated effort that raises awareness on metrics, methodologies, and best practices in measuring energy environmental efficiency of the ICT sector. And we do this with a different group of stakeholders, and together with Trust IT, with a coordinator, there are other two partners who join ICT Footprint, and that's Deloitte Sustainability from Paris, who look after all lifecycle assessment as part of their business mission. Within ICT Footprint, they support the delivery of the tool that I'm going to be talking about today, and Eurocities, who help deliver and raise awareness around the ICT methodologies to their European network of cities around Europe. And our main output in the 36 months is that we'll show you today a wonderful dynamic ICT methodology standards interactive map that also help us in the overview that Andy will be talking about later on. We raise awareness in the pluriannual work that's been done around ICT standards in this specific area of energy efficiency, and we've developed this map that you can access and view. We also have a marketplace for both buyers and sellers, which is gaining lots of momentum, where you can find sustainable ICT supplies, or you can publish your services and procurement and search for clients. We organize a set of these webinars, which is great for visibility and for understanding better the whole concept around making savings around your carbon footprint. And we also have a help desk. And then if you have some success stories, we'd like you to then send them to us. And then lastly, the self-assessment that I'm going to be discussing with you later on. So without further ado, I'm going to pass us to our first speaker of the webinar. He's Alex Bardell, and presentation Data Center Standards, the EU Landscape. Over to you, Alex. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for that. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So yes, my name's Alex Bardell. I'm an Executive Board member for Sustainability for London. This presentation was actually supposed to be delivered by our Executive Director, John Booth, but unfortunately he has a family bereavement and can't be with us today. So we sat down last week and we've created a slide deck on the topic of data center standards in the European Union landscape. What we hope to be covering today is what a standard is with a capital S, what a standard is with a lower s, what guidance prevail within the European data center landscape. A little slow. So a little bit of introduction to myself. So I'm an Executive Board member of Sustainability for London. Sustainability for London is a members non-for-profit group with a focus on really looking at delivering sustainable ICT solutions. We're made up of a group of like-minded individuals, and predominantly we met through the Green IT and Data Centre elected groups within the British Computer Society over a number of years. Over time, our kind of common shared interest in sustainability led and developed into a wider community, so we decided to establish SSL as a way of managing our common shared interests. Similarly, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've we've met a number of people in organisations across Europe, and we've also set up a collaboration network called Green IT Global, which includes Green IT Amsterdam, ourselves Sustainability for London, Green IT SDG Group in Switzerland, and the Agit guys in Paris, France. Sorry, it's taking a little time for the slides to load. So there's a great deal of confusion in the industry and thus in the marketplace over what standard should be adopted, and where we need to use an organisation to actually deliver these standards. There's also a need to determine what a standard big S is, a standard small S is, and how this operates to the relevant guidelines and guidances. This presentation hopes to clarify any confusion that may exist around the delivery of these areas. So, a standard with a capital S, one that's been created either by the International Standards Organization, ISO, or a national country body. National country bodies are usually supported to some extent by their own national government, and the ISO is made up of those national countries' standard bodies. There are also associated specialist subcommittees made up of interested parties. These parties may be invited or require access. They will usually be either a party with a vested interest, so that would be someone like a manufacturer, something like that, maybe like an industry association, someone who speaks on behalf of its members, or possibly just individual members who have an interest in the area of subject. All standards have to undergo an extensive approval process, which means they've got to pass through various stages of consultation, comment, and finally national and regional committees meeting before they consider and are ready to publish. Typically, standards are all reviewed on an ongoing basis and probably around about every 5 years in the cycle. Within the European Union, as a region, there are 3 organisations that are recognised. These organisations are the CEN, which is the European Committee for Standards, the CENELEC, which is the Committee for Electrotechnical Standardisation, and ETIS, European Telecommunications Standards Institute. The national bodies, which are there to define standards, are people like the BSI, the British Standards Institute. Within Holland, there is the Netherlands Standardisation Institute, NEN, and within Deutschland, Germany, we have the Deutsches Institut für Normung, or the German DIN. A regional standard will be published within the country as required with the designated country codes. And if you've got an example of this, if we look here, so we've got a British one. That standard in the UK will be BS, EN, then we'll have the standard number, which is the 5600, and the -1, which then indicates the number within the series that standard is. And finally, there's the year of publication, and that's quite useful to reference how relevant or current it is. If the same standard was published within the Netherlands or Germany, we would just change the code on the front, so instead of BS, it'll be NEN. Many standards may retain the original language, but they also may be translated. Mistranslated, it needs to be an appropriate translation body and a degree of verification that there may be some issues around terms and terminology as part of the translation. Standards with a lowercase however, can be created by anyone, and thus are not independently peer-reviewed or discussed at any national, regional, or international level. The credibility of a standard that hasn't been validated may be limited when compared to a standard with a big S, and a number of big S standards, though, will start off with a lowercase, and as they become accepted and more mature, then groups seek to accredit them as a big standard. Guidelines can be treated similarly. This is not to say they don't have value, because they do, but clearly some standards and guidelines have to be used, otherwise they would not be widely adopted. And actually most standards start off as individuals and then they become the ISO standards that we recognise over time. Within the data center industry itself, within the data center industry in particular, there is a bewildering landscape of standards. Standards and guidelines which lead and have caused significant confusion. So if we look in here, within the Americas, there's the American standard created by the Associated Organization of the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, such as Telecommunications Industry Associates, TIA, and Building Industry Consultancy Services International, Inc., which are actually country standards used by global corporations based in the US or all overseas data center facilities to ensure that they conform to an internal company requirement. There was also something that is well recognized in the data industry, and this is the Uptime Institute. It's widely adopted and has a rating system for each data center. Now, data centers will have a rating level between 1 and 4. 1 being a very simple, non-redundant data center, 4 being highly available, redundant systems, which in theory should never fail. I say in theory because there has been some incidents when this happens. However, uptime is not a standard. It may be a standard, but it's not peer-reviewed, and there is no consultation documentation around it. Another industry standard that's used within data centers is green grid data center maturity. So this isn't actually a standard. It's more of a roadmap or an ideology of where data centers should go in the future, specifically around their maturity. Within the European Union, there is the European Code of Conduct for Data Centers, which looks at the energy efficiency of individual data centers themselves. This is a series of best practice relating to energy efficiency. However, some of its content is extremely useful on a strategic and cultural level. It's also been incorporated into the EN 5600 series as a technical report and can be used to assess data centers. So let's talk about some of the ISO. So although not directly associated with the data center industry, the following standards can be applied and will be part of any EU public sector tendering process. So they are important. So the starting ISO that everyone probably understands is 9001, and this is around the quality management and ensuring that the processes of the organisation meet the expected requirements. And these are mandatory in public sector tenders. The next one is ISO 4001, which looks at the environmental management standards. Again, mandatory in public sector tendering. ISO 22301, which is business continuity standards. This is rare, but is becoming increasingly popular, specifically in the light of a number of high-profile failures within the data center arena. ISO 27001, which is used across IT, and it's very important because it's around information security. And it's being able to deliver an organisation or a data centre to deliver the expected level of security, but it will become mandatory and is specifically relevant with the release of the GPDR, which is a new European data privacy standard. And finally, ISO 50001, which is the energy management system standards. Again, it's really a de facto mandatory standard as a certification. So this standard does exempt organisations from certain elements of the EU Energy Efficiency Directive. So we then move on to the EN. The EN 5600 series of standards cover the following topics. The -1 covers general concepts. It also covers the building, construction, power distribution, environmental controls, telecommunications cabling systems, security systems, and finally, management and operational information. The standards marked in red are currently in the review process, and obviously if you are more interested in actually providing input, at the end of this presentation I've got John Booth's contact details. If you would like to contact him directly, he's actually working within his role with the EU Code of Conduct. And the Eureka project, they're actually looking at defining some of these EN standards as they're required going forward. So what other standards out there? Well, there's the EMAS, or Eco-Management, and that's an audit scheme incorporated within the European Union code of conduct, and the EN 5600 TR99-1 into this criteria. And there's also this concept of Lot 9. Lot 9 is a requirement directive from the EU for ICT equipment. Whilst not directly related to the data center, it relates to the ICTFOOTPRINT.eu and its objectives. I'm sure that Rita could probably provide some more input if needed later on within this presentation. Sorry, I'm just having little problems with my screen going on. So in summary, let's talk about what John conceptualized as the Magnificent Seven. So in John's role as a member of the Eureka project under the EU Horizon 2020 program, the consortium has adopted the following must-haves within the data center world, both for the enterprise and the collation organizations. An enterprise organization is one which controls its own data center facilities and the ICT equipment which resides in it. A colo facility is one that merely provides space and power and cooling for other organizations to host their equipment. Although what is relevant is that if you actually look at some of the cloud service providers, and this is where there's a huge growth in terms of providing services, they would probably come under the colo umbrella, and they provide services back to individual organizations, and the people consuming those services are very interested in ensuring that they meet the expected criteria. So the Magnificent Seven are obviously the ISOs, so the 9001, 14001, 23, so on and so forth, ensuring that you are able to participate in the EU Code of Conduct and that you are able to adhere to the EN 5600 series of standards. So in summary, which standards should we follow? Well, we are in Europe, so we should probably want to adopt the EU standards, irrespective of what political things are happening on. And another real reason why this is important is that a lot of the knowledge, or most of the knowledge within the EU data center, is built around EU standards. Similarly, there's a lot of interaction between the European Union and America, so there are agreements to try and consolidate standards. So you kind of feel that if your EU standard is being adhered to, there will be a lot of synergy and commonality and agreements such as, although it's being reagreed, things like the safe harbor, which will allow you to actually consolidate your standards. We should also follow the design management and aspects that are being defined by the EN standards I've spoken about. And we should ask for European Union Code of Conduct participation for our co-location partners to ensure that they're meeting the expected standards. But also, we should be mindful of EMAS. It is not currently mandatory, but it may well be at some point in the future. So that, I think, is in summary, is my presentation and the views from John today. Now I'm just going to go and have a look at questions from the audience. Okay, Eureka is not in the end. Okay, so I'm just quickly looking at the questions here. While you look at that, Alex, thank you very much. Yep. If I may say that, just have a look at what's been put up there. If I may just add something, clearly when we refer to standards, we always refer to them as global, don't we? I mean, I know there are clearly, we're promoting European efforts, but the working groups are made up of totally international membership, and we adhere to global standards, and that's why the whole international flavour is so relevant and important. So I think that's just an important piece of information that we are clearly, we know that standardization has to be a global effort to succeed. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to, I don't think you did say that Eureka was defining EN 5060 standard. I understand that you're participating to contributing to the standard portfolio within Eureka, correct? Yes. And please excuse any slight misunderstandings. My expertise is around smart cities and developing the data center technologies rather than have a working knowledge of standards. So if there are any specific questions around standards, please feel free to send an email to John Booth, who would normally do this presentation, and he will probably give you a bit more in depth. And I would apologise if I maybe have made a couple of errors. It's not my expertise, unfortunately. I'm standing in for him because he's not here today. But,
that's okay, Alex. Don't
I would like to say it's an opportunity, because if I look at here, that most questions aren't. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to pass out before I hand over?
Well, I have one in the meantime, in case the audience give them time to maybe put up any other questions. It would be interesting to understand what kind of support Sustainability for London provides towards the creation of the whole sustainable data centres and related ICT equipment. I think, we've given the overview now of the intense work carried out from the standards perspective, but clearly, what would be some top priorities, if you like, to consider the ICT equipment involved on what you're doing?
So what we're doing, so our team includes a number of data center auditing specialists. So we have been training a number of people in things like code of conduct. So what we can do is to come along and spend time with individuals or organisations to understand how sustainable their current capability is. We also are working with our kind of sister organisations within the Global Green IT Alliance, which is the people in Holland, France and Switzerland, to help define what some of these standards are. So particularly as we're moving now to a kind of smarter view of the world, and digitalisation is prevalent, what we're finding is the importance of having standards which people can understand and make sure that they're adhered to is key. And what we want to try and do is move away from the sort of the concept of trying to understand the details, to just say, here are a set of standards, and if your suppliers or your partners adhere to those standards, you clearly know what they are. And so this is one of the main objectives of setting up the Pan-European Alliance, is to help define what some of these standards are, particularly in the complexities of projects and organisations where they go across borders and across countries.
Okay, that's perfect, Alex. I think with that, I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of myself and those listening in. And I've left the details up for a few minutes. So if anyone has any further questions, they can contact you directly on the email. And please send any messages on Twitter. And then from our side, for ICT Footprint, clearly we'd love to have a success story that we can put up on our as a communication piece and on our website, Alex. So that would be interesting. I do have a question that's just come in, actually, just quickly, if we want to address that. It says, it would be useful to stress the fact that the ICT equipment in the data centre is the primary user of power, not the building. Unfortunately, the focus is currently on the building. This needs to change. What can be done about this? It's an interesting perspective.
And that's interesting. And I think one of the reasons why is that the actual owner of the cost of the electricity is site and facilities rather than the data centers themselves. So a lot of the consumers of the ICT equipment, they don't actually see the cost of the energy, because the energy sits within a different P&L. And so the challenge is that the actual owners of the IT equipment, they don't see power and the electricity bill as being the challenge. So it would probably mean that we would need to work with organisations and companies to actually ensure that the owners of the system see the cost associated with the power. So yes, you're right, but the reason why it's the buildings is because traditionally electricity, power and the data centres within organisations are seen as being the owners of the site and facilities, whereas the computer equipment that sits within the data centre is owned by the project, the teams and the people with the P&L to pay for it, but they never actually, they don't cross over. So as a consequence, that the actual carbon footprint associated is not seen by the end users. And what can be done about it? Sorry? No,
go on, Alex.
Yep. And so what can be done about it is really around working with the data center managers so that they can then pass that cost on to the owners, and actually to affect the behavior of the end users who buy the ICT equipment to put into data centers, so that there's a more sustainable view of what it is they're actually doing, because currently they're detached. And actually, as it moves to cloud computing, you're finding a further detachment because consumers of the service don't even know where the data center is, and they have no relationship with the data center and the power and the elements associated with delivering that compute capacity.
Very good. And very interesting question. Thank you again, Alex. Let's move on, and the next presentation is by myself. We're, as part of ICT Footprint, together with Deloitte and Eurocities, we're putting together some tools. And the first is called the self-assessment tool for services. The second is the self-assessment tool for organizations for carbon footprint of ICT services. Now, if we consider how green is green ICT and what is it? The global information communication technology industry accounts for approximately 2% of global CO2 emissions, a figure equivalent to aviation. Sorry, this is coming in quite slowly. And so the whole concept around raising awareness and providing practical tools for ICT carbon footprint measurement and reduction is key. And basically, with a decrease of emissions of just 15%, it can generate savings of 600 billion by 2020. Now, the scenario in measuring carbon footprint in ICT is very complex, and what we've tried to do, and something I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, was that a lot of work has been done over the last 2 years with standards bodies and industry on particular ICT methodologies in the areas around goods, services, organizations, projects and cities. And what we've done on ICT Footprint is actually map these, and what we have is we've considered the global landscape on this assessment and actually pulled out templates, if you like, on each of these particular ICT standards. And as you can see, we've given an example of ETSI, and we've tried to indicate how you would use that methodology and ask for particular support. The fact that this wasn't visible before, so this is a nice piece of information that you can find in one place to actually show and demonstrate the extensive amount of work that's been done in the past, and it's now all in one place. What ICT Footprint has wanted to do was to develop a first practical tool on approaching the measurement of carbon footprint of ICT services, utilizing some of these ICT methodologies that you've seen indicated already in this map. So, what is it? It's called SATS, and it's already online. It's simple, free, and it's easy to use. We ask from you just 5 minutes of your time. That's how long it will take you to do. And what you would get in return is a personalized report about your ICT service. And this is what it looks like when you go onto the page, and we'd like to invite you clearly to complete this. We've left the URL for you, and it provides you with an approximate climate change and primary energy footprint over the development of 1 year. Now, we're considering this SAT-S as a building block for what we're then going to pull out for the end of the year, which is a SAT-O, the self-assessment tool for organizations. We wanted to start like this, and the goal is to raise awareness, to identify the environmental hotspots of your products and services, and it pulls out a simplified key environmental performance indicator. We've also indicated in a column on the right-hand side what the application doesn't do, okay, and we've left the list for you there. So basically, you would answer a set of questions. There are 9 to 12 self-explanatory questions. You get results, you understand, and you hopefully take action. There are a series of tooltips that come out under the question mark that gives you an understanding of how to complete this, because it's meant for people who are not clearly, it's intended for a non-technical audience, and we've done this on purpose so everyone can try and complete this, to create these checks, and we wanted to introduce a captivating user experience, or people are going to get bored and we will just lose them. Okay. So what is under the hood of the SAT-S? We've tried to provide an easy user interface with a simple guided questionnaire with examples, and we've actually sat there with extensive brainstorming saying, would a user understand this? And then if they didn't, we'd say, no, they're not going to understand this question, we'd change it. And so there's a behind-the-scenes insight about how the calculation is provided. There's the engine, and it's basically a simplified life cycle assessment, loosely based, clearly on standard methodologies, and these are the two that we've indicated in this particular SAT-S. And then the actual report raises awareness on ICT footprint and the calculation methodologies. So this is the first step towards creating this culture change and understanding then what next steps you would then need to do. And so clearly ICT has a huge impact in production in our digitized economy. And let me just move the next slide. So the need for ICT for energy efficiency interventions is very important, and we know now that there are methodologies available to help calculate this ICT carbon footprint. And what we want to do is to try and embrace, when we said the whole building block of first services, and then moving to a more useful and holistic tool, which would be then the SAT-O before the end of this year, which can provide more complex calculations while retaining this very user-friendly interface with questions and simple results. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. You have the URL to access the SAT-S, where we invite you to warmly fill this out, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Clearly, this is very important because our aim is to get this and for it to be a useful tool for non-technical people. And then, so get filling and do let us know. Thank you very much. That would be the end of my presentation. So let's have a look if we have any questions that are coming in. Do bear in mind, as I said, it is for a non-technical audience. Let's see if some questions come in over the next 5 minutes that we can address in a short while. And with that, I would go ahead and introduce our third and final webinar speaker of the day, and that's Andy Stevens, who's the Senior Customer and Project Manager at Carbon Trust. And his presentation will be on the ICT sector guidance for the GHG protocol product standard. So with that, Andy, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Silvana. And yes, so I'm going to give you a sort of overview of the ICT sector guidance. And as you can see, this is based on the GHG protocol product standard, which is one of a number of standards that the GHG protocol have produced, and obviously it is one of the most widely used methods for measuring carbon footprints globally. So that most well known is the corporate standard, and the supply chain or Scope 3 standards and the product standards are the ones at the top of the screen there, and the ones at the bottom are other standards that have been produced by the GHG protocol over the last 10 years they've been in existence. What maybe people aren't so much aware of is that there are also a number of sector guidance documents being produced either by the GHG protocol or by other organisations, and then effectively validated by the GHG protocol to cover different sectors. So that's where the ICT sector guidance fits in, and these are typically produced by groups of stakeholders to provide a consensus around providing more detailed guidance to support the main GHG protocol standards. So the ICT sector guidance is built on the product standard, so it's therefore taking a life cycle approach to measuring the emissions of ICT products. And by products in the terminology we mean goods and services. And the approach we've taken with the ICT sector guidance is really to focus on services, generally because that tends to be more complex, and therefore it's more important to provide the type of guidance that you'd need in order to be able to measure the ICT footprint of a service. And they look over the life cycle, so look through all the stages of the service, from producing the service, deploying, delivering it, the use phase, which in most cases is the most significant, and if there's sort of end of life issues around the service as well. And it's been written by practitioners for practitioners, so very much aimed at a technical audience of people who are sort of fairly expert in not only carbon footprinting but also in ICT. And to give you an overview of the structure and the scope of the ICT sector guidance, the three main chapters, the service chapters, cover telecoms network services, desktop managed services, and cloud and data center services. And they're supported by the two, what we've called here, technical support chapters, which cover hardware and software, because those are typically components in any ICT service. And what I'm going to do is briefly take you through those main chapters with just sort of 2 or 3 slides on each chapter to give you a flavour of what's in those. The ICT sector guidance has been some long time in sort of establishing it and going through a process of review, and is due to be published in the next month, and it will be published on the GHG protocol website. So the first chapter, the telecoms network services, the guidance subdivides this into 3 main areas. So customer domain area, which are often known as CPE or customer premises equipment, the service platform, which is the network itself, and then operational support activities. And for each of these activities, we split that down into the different life cycle stages, and provide guidance for each of those 3 areas on what's covered and how you would, sort of different methodologies for measuring the emissions. So the custom domain area includes ICT equipment which is needed for the network service, the telecoms network service, for equipment that's deployed at the customer's premise. And also includes any cooling or UPS equipment which is supporting the equipment, and the end user equipment such as PCs or video conferencing systems that are specifically part of the telecom service being provided. And for the service platform itself, so this includes all of the network equipment, so typically sort of routers and servers and switching sites within the network. So all the network equipment used by the TNS provider which is delivering this specific service. And again, cooling and UPS equipment which is supporting that is included, and very significantly the electricity and any other energy related emissions associated with the network equipment. So typically this will be electricity to power the routers, but could, for a mobile network, could also include diesel generators for off-grid base stations or backup diesel generators. So that's sort of very briefly the TNS chapter and the boundary that is covered. We obviously don't have time to go into a huge amount of detail on each, so I'm just giving you a quick flavour. And sort of the third area there, the operational activities, those are like support activities, things like maintenance, so truck rolls for maintenance, activities related to the design, surveying, the deployment as well. Non-technical support such as sales or marketing, and also the decommissioning of the IT equipment. So moving on to the next chapter, the desktop managed services. So this is a typical, will be a deployment of, for maybe a large corporation, could be thousands of laptops and PCs, and support services, help desk, and end user infrastructure. And this diagram shows the main components of a typical desktop managed service. And in the DMS chapter, we also provide a process map so that a typical deployment of a desktop managed service and how that relates to the 5 sort of standard life cycle stages, and so how you allocate the emissions from different stages to the overall emissions. And what the DMS chapter provides is guidance on establishing the scope of what the service covers, how to define the functional unit, how to define the boundary, allocation of emissions, which is typically for ICT products and services, can be quite tricky. So you might have shared services, you might have sort of cloud or data center providing support to a desktop managed service, but it might also be shared with other services. So how do you go about doing the allocation for that? Guidance is provided, and the data collection and how you calculate the emissions. And we will also provide a worked example in the chapter. So this structure, which I've highlighted here for the desktop managed services, is actually typical for most of the chapters because it's following the structure in the product standard. And in all the chapters, we've also provided sort of one or more worked examples to show how you might work through an actual example. So that was a brief cover of the DMS chapter, and moving on to the cloud and data center services. So again, with a lot of as you can see, with a lot of the ICT services, they can be quite complex, involving lots of different bits of hardware equipment, bits of network. So to break them down into their constituent parts is very helpful in building up the total picture and being able to measure the total emissions, the total footprint over the whole life cycle. So again, what we've done here in the Cloud and Data Center Services chapter is broken the typical service down into the 3 main elements, which is the emissions related to the data center, the emissions related to the network, and the emissions related to the end user devices. And then again, for each of those, we provide guidance taking you through how to calculate the emissions for each of those areas. So again, a sort of very quick summary here for the data center emissions. One of the principles that we highlight is that all of the emissions of the data center needs to be captured. So that typically means not just the emissions of the ICT equipment, but also, very importantly, the data center overheads, which would usually be cooling and other sort of mechanical equipment. And either you can use the sort of traditional approach of applying a PUE factor, but we also provide guidance on a slightly more sort of granular approach where you divide the emissions of the data center into fixed and variable emissions. So the fixed one being the overheads and the variable ones being relating to the ICT usage. And then provide different ways of calculating those different emissions and, importantly, allocating them to the end service. So the end service will be related to the ICT equipment it's running on. If that's a virtualized server, it'll be then the virtual machine within that, and that's obviously as part of the overall data center. So this chapter provides quite detailed guidance on how to go about doing that. Then the network emissions for a typical service. So if you think of email as a service, you've got the server in the data center. The network is transferring the email data backwards and forwards. Typically, the emissions associated with the network in such a service are relatively small compared to the emissions of the end user equipment in the data center. And so we've provided a sort of relatively simple approach for network emissions in this context by looking just at the providing emissions per gigabyte of data transfer. There are more sophisticated ways, and obviously you can refer back to the Telecoms Network Service chapter for a more detailed approach. And then the end user device emissions, so that would be PCs, laptops, tablets, or mobile phone, or whatever is being used to access the service. So the chapter provides guidance on measuring the in-use and embodied emissions, and again the issue for how you allocate the emissions of that equipment to the specific service you're looking at. And then to move on again, so those are the three service chapters. We have, as I mentioned, two support chapters, the hardware and software chapters. And these could be used standalone in their own right, but typically the way we envisage them being used is in support of measuring a bigger ICT service. Again, we provide sort of different approaches. So in the hardware chapter, there's these four different methods, depending on the context, the data availability, and the materiality of the emissions of the hardware. There are different approaches. So it's almost like a hierarchy which you can choose which is the most appropriate for the context and the particular situation that you're looking at measuring the emissions. And the chapter provides, again, a process map to map the different processes in hardware from sort of manufacture and use through to end of life, mapping them against the standard life cycle stages, and provides more detail so that those four high-level sort of methods that I mentioned provide this table just simply summarizes those and provides examples or comments of where the different ones would be appropriate. And obviously the chapter goes into a lot more detail in describing that. And then finally the chapter on software, we've divided into two sections. One is looking at high-level guidance for calculating full life cycle emissions of software, and the second is much more detailed sort of specialist, typically for software developers wanting to understand the energy consumed by the software during its use stage. So the first, the life cycle approach, again, we map different sort of stages of software development and use to the standard life cycle stage approach. And there's also provided a very simple allocation method for getting a high-level calculation of software emissions, as again, typically software is a relatively small part of a total sort of product or service in terms of the emissions. And the more detailed guidance in the second part of the software chapter is looking at the energy used by software, and that goes through guidance of how you do this with sort of practical examples for different types of software, so operating systems, application software, and virtualization. So that covers quite briefly the scope and a brief look at the content of the different chapters in the guidance. I just sort of want to end with a quick word with the development process for how the ICT sector guidance has been put together. So originally it was, the whole initiative was convened by WRI, WBCSD, GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, and the Carbon Trust, and supported by 10 ICT companies who participated in the process. And obviously the WRI and WBCSD are the two organisations which founded and are responsible for the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. There was a steering committee with sort of wide representation, including government, standards organisations, ICT companies, and a technical working group of 60 members who worked on the different chapters and reviewed the overall final chapters and documents. And there was an external stakeholder advisory group which was open to anyone. There were over 200 participants from over 50 companies and 45 countries. And they reviewed and provided comments on the draft versions which were published and made publicly available. So there were two series of drafts which were produced with formal public comment periods, and those produced over 700 comments, which we then received back, and the technical working group went through those and updated the documents through the two different draft versions. And then there was finally a QA check by the technical working group and by ourselves at the Carbon Trust, acting as final authors and editors, and also by the WRI, who reviewed the whole documents for conformance with the GHG protocol product standard. And as I mentioned, the final guidance is due to be published next month. So just leave you with a sort of overview of the document again, and thank you very much for your attention. I hope it's been helpful, and we are looking forward to making this document finally available.
Thank you, Andy. That was very, very descriptive. We've got the question up already on where will it be available. You're saying it's going to come out in about a month's time. Will it be on the Carbon Trust website?
So it will be on the GHG protocol website. They have a separate area for sector guidance documents which are built on the GHG protocol. I mean, there will also, on the Carbon Trust, we will also provide links to it, and on the GESI website will be links as well.
Perfect. Okay. I have a question. Actually, there's a follow-up to that first question. I don't know if you can see it on the chat. Is it going to be completely public? Will there be a restricted part to it?
No, it's completely public, and so there is a section there how it relates to other standards. So it's very much about measurement of greenhouse gas emissions. So the standards it relates to are more ISO greenhouse gas standards and the greenhouse gas protocol, which follows very similar. The ISO standards like 14067 is the relevant ISO standard.
Okay. In fact, yeah, that was one of the related questions. So there's a chapter dedicated to that in the guidance, and you're saying, I'm looking at the outline now, but I think that answers the second part of that question. I have one question, if I may, Andy. In your opinion, what's the biggest benefit for the stakeholders that they'll get from this particular guidance compared to others that you think is a sort of cherry on the cake, if I can say?
So I think it's quite different. So it's not a formal standard like an ISO standard. It is very much, it's written by practitioners for practitioners, and it's providing guidance on how to apply primarily the greenhouse gas protocol product standard, but other similar standards like the PAS 2050 or the ISO life cycle product footprinting standards. But it goes into a lot more detail than you can in the formal standard. And as I said, the different chapters focus on what are the most common types of ICT service, which are quite complex and may involve like thousands of bits of equipment, different sort of profiles. And so it's important to know what are the methods that can be easily applied, because you can become overly complex in terms of the methodology. And so what we try and do is take a holistic approach, which helps practitioners in applying the standards and doing realistic but accurate assessments of greenhouse gas emissions.
I'm sensitive to time. We've got still a couple of minutes. My next question was, we're going to ask you about the biggest challenges you face when putting together the guide. But if I look at your penultimate slide when you've gone through your numbers, the 700 comments, I mean, that was pretty difficult to wade through. And did you address them all?
Yeah, so I think you're right. The biggest challenge was this is very much a collaborative process, and you can see from this slide that the participation, and that also meant the whole process took a lot longer than we had originally envisaged. Yeah, we did all the 700 comments. We put in a big spreadsheet. We marked off each one what the comment was, what the action was going to be taken, and updated the document, and then reviewed that with the technical working group. So it was very much, and the whole process was following a similar process to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol uses for its full standards, like the product standard or the corporate standard. So it was a sort of extensive collaborative process, which is really, I think, has benefited the final document, but has been one of the challenges of running a program like this.
And a question from the audience. Does the guide actually include some examples as well?
Yeah, so each chapter we have a worked example relevant to that particular. Some are quite extensive, and they're, where possible, they're based on either sort of published work, or some of the companies participating is based on a case study that they've done, or a piece of work that they've done. So they're based on real life examples.
Excellent. Just a couple of points from previous presentations. Just to make a note, I think there was a question requesting sources, so we'll ensure you do know that this is a pre-recorded webinar. You can go back to it. In the finalized versions, we'll include any sources where it refers to statistics or quantifiable data. This was a question that's come up. I had another point that I've now forgotten. I do apologise. No, I don't think there was another one up here. We've responded to the previous question. Last 2 minutes, we can just put up then the last slide. You'll see that there's a call to action, obviously, at the end of our webinar, where you can register for the newsletter, contact us via LinkedIn, see if you'd like to participate in a webinar yourself, learn more about the services, and if you want to come on as a provider or buyer onto our marketplace, then we'd appreciate that. Yes, I remembered that other question, excuse me. It was, the question came up on what made you put together ASAT-S, and I think the answer to that is that we wanted to introduce a better raising awareness for our stakeholders, and to get them thinking of perhaps, or enticing them to introduce more sophisticated services as part of their services in their organisation. And then we believe the SAT-S also positions the services utilised. So I think the slides will be available, absolutely, together with the pre-recorded webinar. So with that, I'd like to thank all our viewers. And just to give you some positives, the numbers have increased from the beginning to the end, and we're thrilled at the numbers who managed to come in and listen to these webinars. Thank you to our speakers, Alex and Andy, both very interesting inputs, and please stay tuned, and we're ready for the webinar number 7 that will come in this autumn. Thank you very much. Have a lovely summer, everybody. Thank you once again. Goodbye.